Changing the nozzle on my Micro Swiss all-metal hot end on the Maker Select Plus. That's today on Grim 3D. So the first thing I'm going to do before I start messing with my hot end at all is I'm going to go ahead and preheat it. So I'm going to go to Controls and do a preheat, and then I'm just going to use this basic PLA setup that I have in this option, preset number 1, because the last filament I had in here was PLA. The reason for preheating the print head is that inside there, it's getting warm so I'm not touching it, but inside there is still a little bit of plastic left over from the last thing I printed. And the last thing I printed was out of PLA, which is why I'm using a PLA profile in my preheat. If you do not preheat the plastic, that little bit of plastic that's left in there can actually create enough resistance to damage your heat break. That small connection that's between the heated part of your hot end and the cooling mechanism that keeps heat from traveling up through your filament and sticking your filament to the inside of your filament channel inside your hot end. So I'm preheating this to protect the inner workings here. When it's up to temperature, I'm going to go ahead and remove this nozzle. Now that my nozzle is totally heated up, I'm going to go ahead and remove the nozzle. You want to make sure that you hang on to this heat block with a pair of pliers or anything that can hang on to it and keep it from moving. But you have to be very, very careful not to damage any of these wires that come out the side of your heat cartridge or the thermistor that reads the temperature of your hot end. So be very careful of any of these wires that are coming out the side. I generally like to use a pair of channel locks to grab it. I grab it just barely on the edge. And then I really like to use a small ratchet with a 9mm socket on the end, which fits the Micro Swiss all-metal hot end nozzles just fine. You got to be very careful not to touch anything that's going to get you burned, but it must be hot as you do this. And you can see in there's the plastic that could have damaged my heat break. And here's my brand new nozzle. Look for some pictures of differences between the new one and the old one, and I will actually post some stuff later in the video about how I knew that the nozzle was getting bad and that it needed to be replaced. So I'm going to go just with my fingers, and I'm going to go ahead and just get that started in my heat block. Remember, the heat block is still hot, but I need to get those threads just started just like that, and I can feel it heating up, so I got my fingers off of it now. And then I'm going to come back in with my, kind of hard to get a good angle on this, with my pliers to grab the aluminum hot end, and I'm going to use my ratchet, just the socket at first. Remember, this is hot. It'll heat that socket up really quick. Okay. And then, with the ratchet attached, I'm going to go ahead and give that, make sure I'm holding the block still. I'm going to give that hot end just a little bit of tension, not too much. And there you have it, a brand new nozzle on my Micro Swiss all-metal hot end on my Maker Select Plus, ready to go. So here's how I found out that I needed a new nozzle on my hot end. If you look at this picture right here, you'll notice that this skirt is not actually getting any squish. down onto the build plate. And I thought that was weird, so I re-leveled the bed and I tried again. My next attempt was much the same, but actually ended up being a little bit worse. If you look right here along this skirt, you'll see that I'm not getting any squish on the front, or you can actually see a little bit of separation in the back as well. So then I cleaned the build plate, re-leveled the bed, and actually reapplied my hairspray as well. With a clean, re-leveled, and re-hairsprayed build plate, I went ahead and tried again, and you'll notice the skirt didn't get a whole lot better. So I figured I'd let it just go and start printing the object, and that didn't work either. So then I scraped everything off the bed. I tried again. I figured it would work if I just let it go a little bit more, if I could get that first layer down, but it didn't work. Nothing was sticking. The print head was pulling all of my filament back up off the bed, and I had to bail one more time. To get this to eventually print, I actually raised the feed rate of my filament to about 115% of normal. And then it started to stick to the bed just fine and started to get the right kind of squish, and the first layer rolled perfectly. While researching this problem online, I found a user of the same printer who had noticed that even though he didn't use any abrasive filaments, which I don't really use any abrasive filaments either, he noticed that over time the orifice on his print nozzle had actually worn out and gotten bigger. So I took a look at mine, and sure enough, there it is. Considerably bigger than the original 0.4 millimeter brand new nozzle. I realized that this was my problem. Instead of filament being pushed out of a 0.4 nozzle, it was basically falling out of something between 0.5 and 0.6 without readjusting the G-code to compensate. This is also why increasing the feed rate seemed to make such a big difference. It was finally pushing enough filament out through the nozzle to actually work properly. Well, that's it for this episode of Grim 3D. If you find your printer's not working right or it's getting worse over time, you may want to look at the nozzle. I've been using this nozzle for a little over a year, and I really don't use any abrasive filaments in this machine at all, but it just wore out over time. Remember, subscribe, smash that like button, ring the bell. See you out there.